I'm very thankful that everyone has taken the time to be out here on this cool evening, and I love the cool weather. It's not even jacket weather yet, so I forgot, I need to get my phone out. I actually have a presentation tonight. Thank you. All right. It's not quite showing up the way it should. If you would be opening your Bibles to Romans chapter 8, we're continuing our series through Romans this evening. You guys might have to help me on the slides because it's not, internet must be down or something. All right. Having a few technical difficulties. There's an old episode of Gunsmoke that I really enjoy. I love the show Gunsmoke. I watch it almost every day. When I get home for lunch, Easton and I watch Gunsmoke. And it's a favorite of mine because I used to watch it with my great-grandfather and grew up. And there's some pretty fascinating stories. It's not just, if you think of it just as a Western show, it's much more than that. There's some pretty fascinating storylines that go along with this series. Well, there's this one particular episode of this young man who kills a young girl. But he does it by accident. He's actually jealous, and he's trying to kill the man that she's with, but he misses, and he shoots the girl instead. And when they first bring him in and they capture him, he's very arrogant, he's very cocky. He believes, and the reason is because his dad's a very important man in town. And he believes that his dad's essentially just going to pay him off, pay the judge off, and get him out of this difficult situation. But then when they actually go to court, he's actually convicted as guilty and sentenced to hang. And when he discovers that his father doesn't have as much influence as he previously thought he did, he becomes a coward. He comes out pleading and begging for his life, and he's a completely different person than the arrogant individual than he used to be. Now his father, who is desperate to help him and ashamed of his cowardice, decides to create this ruse where he pays off the sheriff and pays off the undertaker to make it look like he was going to hang so that he could then go to Mexico and flee from the law. And he told his son this story and this ruse before he went to the gallows. And so the next day, this young man who previously was so confident, or rather who was previously so afraid of his impending death and fearful, is walking to the gallows very confidently and with a smile on his face. And he's no longer the coward that his father was ashamed of. And so he goes up to the gallows, and they put the rope around his neck, and they pull the lever. Except it's not a ruse, and they actually hang him. See, the father was so ashamed of his son's cowardice and believed he was in the wrong that he lied to his son about this ruse so that he would go to the gallows with confidence and would not shame his father. And it's one of my favorite episodes of the show, and you might be wondering, well, why in the world? That's very sad. But I think it's a very interesting story, and I also think I know of no better picture to describe the idea of false hope than that episode. That this young man had a hope in someone and in something that in all reality wasn't going to happen, wasn't going to come true. Now our Father has made us a promise. God has made us a promise. He's paid the fine, and He has promised to deliver us from death and to save us from sin. And that should fill us with great confidence in our life. It should fill us with great confidence when we meet death at its door. But sometimes as Christians, we act as if we have a false hope. And it's not so much, I don't think, that we don't trust God as it is sometimes I'm not quite sure we really know what we're to hope in. We don't necessarily have a clear definition of what exactly we're supposed to be hoping for as Christians. And in Romans chapter 8, Paul is going to articulate that hope for us. In verse 17 of Romans chapter 8, he's already declared that we are children, and thus because we are children, we are heirs with Christ. That means we're going to inherit something, and we're hoping to inherit something. But what are we hoping to inherit? What are we looking forward to? Well, that's what we want to look at this evening as we discuss the hope of all the world, is the title of this lesson tonight. And someone once wrote that Christianity is a religion of hope. It's a faith that looks forward. For the Christian, they said, the best is always yet to be. And so with that in mind, we'll have 3 points this evening, and that is that the Christian hope is for a better life in a better world with a better body. Those are our 3 points tonight from the text. The Christian's hope is for a better life in a better world with a better body. Can I get it turned down just a little bit? I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Our first point is a better life. There we go. Look at verse 18, if you will, with me. Actually, let's read 18 through 25 together, and then we'll get into the text. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that's to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope. For the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. So as we come into verse 18, we see that what we are hoping to inherit and what we are looking to gain as Christians is first this idea of a better life. Now, if you've ever read a novel, if you've ever read a book or even seen a movie, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but you have quite a bit of a different perspective than the characters themselves, right? Especially if you've already seen the movie before or you've already read the book before. You know what's going to happen. You know that eventually they're going to win in the end. You know that eventually everything's going to be all right. But in particular chapters within that book, and usually around the middle of the book, there's usually a very dark moment. And the characters themselves who are in that moment, they don't know how the story's going to end. They don't know if it's going to be all right. In fact, for them, it might seem like it's not going to. One of my favorite quotes is from the Lord of the Rings series that J.R. Tolkien read, which actually has very deep spiritual truths, and it's similar to C.S. Lewis and what he did with the Chronicles of Narnia. In fact, they were good friends, which is an interesting note. But my favorite character in the Lord of the Rings novels and movies is a character known as Samwise Gamgee. And Samwise is the faithful friend of Frodo the Hobbit. And there's a particular moment in the movies and in the books where they are very discouraged. It all seems lost, all seems hopeless. It's just them, and it doesn't seem like they're ever going to conquer over this great evil that has encompassed the land. And Samwise says to Frodo, he says, "I know it's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be here. But we are. It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered, full of darkness and dangers they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it will shine out the clearer." Now in verse 18 of Romans chapter 8, this is Paul saying, a new day is going to come, and the sun will shine out all the clearer. As he says in verse 18, I consider, he says, that the sufferings of this present life are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed to us. He says we're hoping for something better, a better life. Now, our current life and our current world and what we experience now is full of wonderful moments. It's full of moments of beauty and wonder and joy. But it's also filled with terrible tragedies. It's filled with great injustices, with agonizing betrayals, with daily anxieties, with unmet expectations, with broken dreams. That's this life. Suffering in this life is a part of human experience. But there's nothing inherently good about suffering itself. In fact, suffering is only good if what we are suffering for is worth it. Sore muscles in and of themselves are not inherently good unless you're working out to get healthier. Shots and the pain that come with them, there's nothing inherently good about that pain. In fact, some shots can be bad for you if they're used for nefarious purposes. But they are good if they're going to make you healthier and stronger. And so when Paul looks at the suffering of Christians, he said Christians are called to suffer alongside Jesus, which in this text he says will inevitably lead to glory. Your suffering, he says, is a seed which will grow by the grace of God into unimaginable glory. There is suffering that you endure because of the cause of Christ, and we talked about that a little bit this morning. As you're trying to live a godly life in an ungodly world, you're going to suffer pressure, you're going to suffer persecution, but then there is suffering that you just endure just because you're human. It has nothing to do whether you're a Christian or not. It's just suffering. And Paul says that I look at all of this suffering. You know, there's been a lot of suffering in the world since the beginning of time. And these Christians in Rome were enduring a lot of suffering. And Paul says, I take all of this suffering and I place it on one side of the scale, and I place the glory that's to follow on the other side of the scale, and it can't even compare. It far outweighs the suffering that we are currently enduring. Your current life might be a life of disappointment, of struggle, of pain, but your current life is not your final life. Your real life is yet to come. I love how Paul puts this in Colossians chapter 3. Just turn real quickly to Colossians chapter 3. I'm sorry, you're doing a better job at that than I am. Colossians chapter 3. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Notice, your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with Him in glory. Notice, Paul is saying that this life that you currently experience is not your final life. Your true life is hidden with Christ, and when He appears, that is when your full and real life will begin. And this is so important because there are Christians today who are being convinced that this is their one and only life, and they make ungodly, sinful decisions because they want to live in the moment, they don't want to miss out on life, and Paul says this is not your final life. It's not even the fullest life you will live. The new life is hidden with Christ. And that's why he's able to say in 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 17, this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So our hope is to inherit a better life. And that life that we're hoping to inherit, that better life, will be experienced, as he goes on to say, within a better world. This better life will be experienced in a better world, one in which the curse of sin is broken. And as Paul says here, creation itself is freed from under the burden of humanity's iniquity. Paul explains, interestingly, this is slightly different maybe than sometimes how we think of it, but Paul explains that our salvation is in fact, and our redemption in fact, is tied into the freedom of creation itself, and actually has always been that way. And what is Paul exactly saying here? Well, if you work yourself backwards in the text, start in verse 22 and then go up to verse 19, I think it helps. In verse 22, he states that creation is groaning, for we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Now, generally speaking, whenever Scripture talks about something groaning in pains of childbirth, it's talking about something that is agonizing and waiting for a new and better life to come, something new and better. And it often will use a woman who is in the pains of childbirth and is going through this agony and is waiting for new life. Now, I believe that the groans that just my opinion, but I think the groans that Paul is talking about here that creation is going through are the natural disasters that we sometimes see within our world that were not necessarily meant to be from the very beginning of creation. But the question is, well, what is it groaning for? If it's groaning, what is it longing for? Well, that's seen in verse 21. It's groaning for that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. Creation is longing to be freed from the bondage to corruption, the death and decay that is currently experienced within creation. And it was not intended to work this way, harming and hurting humanity. But it was meant to be, as we see within Eden, a paradise in which God would dwell with humanity. The question is then, well, what happened? If it's longing for something, if it's longing for freedom from corruption, what is it that happened? Well, we see that in verse 20. For the creation, he says, was subjected to futility. Not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope. Creation itself was subjected to futility, or another word that you might use there is vanity. It was subjected to pointlessness. It's not serving the purpose it intended. It was meant to be subject to the dominion of man, but it fights against the dominion of man. It even hurts humanity, and it is within the pangs of death and decay that we see within the creative world. But this, notice it says it was subjected not willingly. This was something, it wasn't subjected to this corruption and death and decay because of something it did. It was against its will, if you will, in which creation was subjected. Well, what in the world is he talking about there? Well, he's talking about what occurred at the very beginning of this story of Scripture when humanity sinned. Now turn your Bibles real quickly to Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. I want you to notice the language here that's used. And Genesis chapter 3 and verse 17, and to Adam he said, because you've listened to the voice of your wife, and you've eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth of you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Notice, when man sins, creation is cursed. Man comes from the dust, and thus the dust from which he came is inherently connected to that which he has done. So he sins, and creation is cursed. And notice how this language of cursing and God cursing the ground in connection to man's sin is seen within other instances throughout Genesis. Notice, for example, Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4, and when Cain is cursed. The Lord said, and now he's speaking to Cain here, you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. Notice, Cain sins, and he is cursed from the ground. And he goes on to say, you're going to toil, but it's not going to produce. So again, man's sin is connected to the creation itself. And then notice in Genesis chapter 5, the hope of Lamech, Noah's father. And he called his name Noah, saying, this one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. So he's looking forward in expectation and hope that Noah might do something to relieve them from the curse that creation has been put under. So the point is this: because creation was cursed along with man's sin, so it now waits to be liberated when humanity is redeemed. But then when will that happen? When will that occur? Going back to Romans 8, you look at verse 19. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. The creation is personified as eagerly longing. That language there means that it's standing on its tippy toes in joyful expectation. And it's doing that because it's waiting for the sons of God to be revealed. There's a current concealing, if you will, of the sons of God. Who really are the children of God? Who really are the children of God? The world does not recognize you as a son or daughter of God. The world does not recognize you as God's children. But there is a time, he says, when that concealment will no longer be. When, in fact, he says, there will be a revealing of the true children of God. When will that occur? It will occur, as Paul says here, and John says in 1 John chapter 3, at the return of Christ and within the resurrection. Notice what John says in 1 John chapter 3. See what kind of love the Father has given to us that we should be called children of God, and so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. See, the world, he said, doesn't know us. But then notice what he says in the next verse. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared, but we know that when He appears, we will be like Him, because we shall see Him as He is. The world doesn't recognize you now, but there will come a revealing of the sons of God when Jesus returns within the resurrection. And he says creation itself will be liberated and freed from under the corruption of sin. So here then is the hope. What are we looking forward to? The inheritance that we have as Christians. That one day, he says, we will share in a better life, in a better world, free from sin and suffering, the new heavens and the new earth in which righteousness dwells. 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 13. What a wonderfully beautiful hope. That one day we will experience a better life in a beautiful world free from sin. And that no matter how beautiful your latest vacation may be, or if you never get to those beautiful vacation spots in this present life, there's an even greater scene waiting for us when Jesus returns. Now, the question then is, how can we as perishable mortal beings hope to inherit something that is imperishable and eternal, this eternal weight of glory that Paul spoke of in 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 17. How can we hope to inherit that when our current bodies are weak, when they're prone to illness? Or maybe we could put it this way: how can we guarantee that we will forever enjoy this better life in this better place without fear of it ever ending? Which leads to the third aspect of the Christian hope, which is that we will enjoy a better life in a better world, thirdly, with a better body. Which I'm very thankful for it now, because my knee is giving me problems while I'm up here. The irony of that, I almost fell down just now. A better body. Looking forward to that. Look at go back to Romans 8, look at verse 23. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit grown inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. Creation, although it will play some part within the final redemption of man, creation itself is not the main focus of God's redemptive work. It was not the main focus in His initial purpose either. He was creating a world in the beginning for a specific people. Creation was made for humanity, and that is the main focus here as well. We groan, he says, aside with, in partnership with creation, and he says what we're groaning for is the redemption of our bodies. The groans we experience in this life and in this current body, what's he talking about, the groans? Well, you know the groans. It's the groans you make when you get up in the morning, right? From being older, being more tired, dealing with illness and sickness and terminal cancer and physical limitations and mental limitations and aches and pains. Those are the groans of the current unredeemed body. And we do everything, it's interesting, we do everything that we can in this life to save our bodies, right? We eat healthier, or some of us do. We have surgery if it's necessary. Some even will do plastic surgery. And all of this is an effort to redeem or buy back what time has stolen from us. And sometimes what sin has taken from us. We try and fix it. We try and redeem it and buy it back. But Paul's point here is that the Christian's inheritance and the Christian's hope longs for an absolute fix for the body, a buying back and a transforming of our current body, as he says in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 21. Jesus, he says, will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him even to subject all things to himself. And that's his whole argument, 1 Corinthians 15, that we don't have time to get into tonight. But this longing that we have, and I've preached on this before, so you know this, but we need to reiterate this. The longing that we have is not that our body would be destroyed and that we would simply be bodiless, floating spirits for all of eternity. That is not our hope. Our hope is that this body will be resurrected and transformed and redeemed, and that it will be clothed with immortality. That's the hope of Christianity. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 4, Paul says, our hope is not that we would be unclothed. And what he's talking about when he says unclothed is that we're naked when we don't have our bodies. So you're considered naked when your spirit goes to be with the Lord, because there's a part of your existence that is not there completely. So he says our longing is not to be naked, not to be unclothed, he said, but to be further clothed, that what is perishable may be swallowed up in what is eternal. And this groaning, he says, seems somewhat to do with the fact that we have, he says, the first fruits of the Spirit. The first fruits of the Spirit. That is the new life that we now experience. He's been talking about the Spirit in Romans chapter 8, and the life that it gives and things of that nature. But the new life that we experience because of the Spirit, the love and the joy and the peace, the fruit of the Spirit that Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. That is essentially what Paul is saying, a down payment of what is to come. Because of the gospel and because of Jesus, we have been given a taste of the better life in this new and better world with our new and better bodies, and we see it because of the gospel. We see what's waiting for it, and we hunger for more. We hunger for that place where only righteousness dwells, where there's no longer sin or anything that defiles or any type of iniquity. He says we hunger and we groan and we long for that. And we see that the blueprint of our own resurrection is within our resurrected Lord. And we see what we want there. Eternal, unending life with God in our newly redeemed and transformed bodies. Now, another interesting note with this is that in James chapter 1 and verse 18, James there says that we are the first fruits over God's creation. Now, I've talked about a little bit about this before. The resurrection of Jesus is the first fruits of our resurrection. That is, the first fruits was the first of more to come. So when we see the resurrection of Jesus, the gospel is saying there's more to come just like this one. But then he looks to Christians in James 1 and verse 18, and he says, we are a kind of first fruits. We are the first of better things to come, the first of more to come, if you will. And so I think what James is meaning there is that as people see us, as Christians, living righteously before God, we are a foretaste of what is to come in the new world. We are the first fruits of this new world, of a place filled with righteous people. And then he says in verses 24 and 25 that we are waiting for this place with a patient hope. If you really understand what you're waiting for, this new life, this better life in a better world with a better body, if you really understand the Christian hope, he says you wait for it with patience. It influences how you live in the current moment. This isn't just about some pie-in-the-sky dream. This is about a hope that echoes backwards over the entirety of your life. It influences the direction of how and why you live for God. It fills you and should fill you with great joy and with great purpose within Jesus Christ. And that is the great hope. That's what he is describing here within Romans chapter 8. Is the hope of all the world. The hope of all the world. When Jessica and I went to Disney a couple of years ago, I'll be honest, I was a little hesitant. I really didn't have a huge desire to go to Disney World. But she'd always wanted to go as a kid, and she never had a chance, so we went. But the evening, we were there at the Magic Kingdom, which is the castle and everything that you've probably seen on the commercials. And when we were there, and they have this special thing at the end where there's these fireworks, and there's all these amazing things that are going on. And in that moment, it's incredible. In that moment, you really do feel like a kid again. Even a cynic like myself, you see this wonder. And you begin to think to yourself, well, what if the world was really like this? What if the world was filled with joy and with kindness and with love? What if it was full of wonder and hope and without any limitations? In fact, I only bought one souvenir for myself the entire trip. And it's this little Mickey Mouse character that is in my office. It's above my laptop, and I put him there. And I bought it. And the reason I bought it was to remind me of that feeling. It was to remind me of that longing that I think we all have. A longing for something to fill us with wonder and with joy. But eventually you have to leave Disney. You have to come back to the real world. And things aren't that way. Some try and manufacture that joy. They try to force paradise in our current world, and it's never going to happen. But the hope of the Christian is that the better life, lived in a better world, with a better body, isn't simply some wish upon a star, but it is a promised reality because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That the new age will come with great glory at the return of our King. And that all of the darkness and the destruction that we have experienced in this life will seem but nothing but a dream. And yet maybe because we endured such suffering in this new place, when the sun, S-O-N, shines, He will shine out all the clearer. Do you have that hope tonight? Have you given your life over to Jesus? Are you trusting in that hope and allowing it to transform your life? If not, why don't you give in to that hope and accept that hope for yourself this evening as together we stand and as we sing.